In all of Test cricket history, we've had over 9,500 documented innings of cricket. Of these, more than 8,700 have produced scores that are in excess of 100. And from all of these innings that have crossed a score of 100, only 506 innings in the history of Test cricket have been scored at a run rate of less than 2 runs per over. Now, even out of all of these, South Africa alone have been responsible for 169 such innings. But since the turn of the century, that is in the last 25 years, South Africa has only been able to do this 8 times, and out of these 8 times even, just once has a team in the history of Test cricket, and that being South Africa, has scored more than 100 runs at a run rate of less than 1 run per over. And this takes us back almost 10 years to an encounter between India and South Africa taking place in Delhi at the Ferozshah Kotla, and the story of one of the greatest ever blockathons till it wasn't. But before we break down this amazing test match and more importantly the kind of innings that South Africa played, hit that subscribe button.
Before we go ahead with the video, mental health is very important to us. Not only to us, but it's also important to us to support our supporters, our subscribers, viewers, people who choose to watch our videos, which is also why we have collaborated with Adapt Wellness, which is a mental health organization, where you'll get a 15% off on your first therapy session. All you have to do is go to the website, choose your therapist, go to their Instagram account, tell them the choice of your therapist, type JB first and get your first therapy session on a 15% off. All the links are in our description. So take care not only of your physical health but also of your mental health.
This goes back to 2015 under the captaincy of Virat Kohli, who had just taken over the Indian Test team. It was a home Test series with India already leading the series 2-0 up and the final Test match to be played. South Africa had looked nothing like they had in their prime, and in fact this was the series that ended their 9-year streak. The 9-year streak of them not having lost a single Test series away from home. Virat Kohli's men had been able to successfully dethrone this side, but it had not come without its fair share of controversies. There had been a lot of talk about the pitches that were offered, especially the one at Nagpur in the previous Test match leading up to this Test match, which the ICC was definitely not happy with. In fact, batting throughout that entire Test series had been so tough that the series up until that Test match had not produced a single century from any of the sides. And if that wasn't already bad enough, AB de Villiers was the only South African to even get 50 plus scores. And given all of this build-up and given how this young Indian team had broken South Africa's Test streak, and although India had won the series and this Test match for the series itself was going to be a dead rubber, what was important was how South Africa would bounce back in this Test match. It would define how their next few years of cricket would go, especially considering the side they'd been leading up to the series. At the toss, the pitch at the Ferozshah Kotla was touted to be a lot better than the previous pitches that had played so far. And no surprises, India winning the toss chose to bat first. This was possibly going to be the best conditions to bat in the entire Test match, and India wanted to make sure they took this advantage, and very similar to how they'd been operating at home up until now, want to pile up a decent score and then put the opposition under pressure using spin. The only chatter around this Test match, at least at the start, was that the pitches were bad, and apart from that there was a selection blunder. A lot of people thought that Virat Kohli getting in Umesh Yadav in place of Amit Mishra, especially when the ball is turning as much, was a bad decision. And I mentioned this because this is going to come back in a surprising way towards the end of the video. Although India did win the toss, it was starting to look like a toss that they probably should have lost or chosen to ball first. And I say this because India found themselves at 66 for 3, and that's when Ajinkya Rahane walked in. Now this was an important juncture in that match, especially because if India did not get a good enough score in the first innings, this Test match could be taken away very quickly. However, for India, and very timely, Ajinkya Rahane scored a masterful 127. He strung in partnerships with both Virat Kohli as well as Ravichandran Aswin, scoring 44 and 56 respectively to get India to 296 for 8 before being dismissed himself. Eventually, India was dismissed for 334 and they still took 117.5 overs to get to this total. And this signified that the pitch was not an easy one to bat on, and that it would take effort and for batters to get in and then identify what kind of deliveries to take on to be able to score big runs. And up until this point, the pitch was playing decently in that there was no outrageous turn. The spinner Dane Peat got 4 wickets and there were overall 69 overs of spin that were bowled, but their star bowler of that innings was Kyle Abbott, who picked up a fifer. South Africa walking in to bat in that second innings would have hoped that they don't repeat what they'd already been doing the entire series. Some of their best batters had been struggling, and this in a side that had the likes of Hashim Amla, AB de Villiers and Faf du Plessis as the batting pillars, and even some good batters like a JP Duminy. Despite all of this, South Africa's innings was a mirror image of what they'd been doing the entire series. They just had no clue in terms of how to shape up against spin, and apart from AB de Villiers, no other batter looked comfortable at any point in that innings. Where de Villiers was the only one showing any kind of resistance, he eventually scored 42 of 78 and the batting order around him completely crumbled. They were all out for 121, trailing eventually by 213 runs. For India, it was Ravindra Jadeja, no surprises there, getting a 5-wicket haul in just 12 overs time. And despite India having a lead of more than 200, they decided not to enforce the follow-on and chose instead to come and bat again. And exactly like the very first innings, this time around as well, it wasn't spin but it was pace that was troubling India because they found themselves yet again losing quick wickets up front, found themselves at 57 for 4. And for India too, in a mirror image of events, it was Ajinkya Rahane who once again stood tall, this time once again with Virat Kohli who scored 88, with Ajinkya Rahane getting a second century in the test match. The duo added 154, eventually getting India to 267, but yet again batting time, taking 100 overs to get there. Ajinkya ended with 100 not out and at this point had become the highest run scorer in the series. It was lunch on day 4 and this is where India decided to declare, setting South Africa an improbable target of 481. Along with that, India had also ensured that they were giving themselves 5 full sessions of test cricket to be able to dismiss the South African batting lineup. And this is where we get to that iconic 4th innings and one of the grittiest displays of batting we've seen in the history of test cricket. Just imagine being the South African side when you still have some of your best players around, going from dominating a lot of teams in their own homes to finally having that 9-year-old streak end. Of course, it was high stakes. Of course, it was a terrible situation for them to be in. But more importantly, even the stats were going completely against the South Africans. And I say this because the highest 4th inning score in a test match in the history of test cricket in India was just 387. And this too happened in 2008-9 when India scored that much to chase down and win a game of cricket against Australia. All other scores on that list were at least 30 to 40 years old. And so in recent times, especially at least since 2000, no team had been able to even cross 300 in the 4th innings of a test match in India. And now when you look at it this way, the only discussion was when would India win the test match? Would it take 2 sessions? Would it take 3 sessions? Or would India have to come out once again on day 5? And although South Africa had world-class batters, the likes of Hashim Amla and Faf du Plessis along with AB de Villiers, they hadn't been able to do anything at all in this series. Hashim Amla up until this point had just 75 runs from the 6 innings that he played in India. Along with that, Faf du Plessis was even worse, having just 50 runs in the 6 innings that he'd played. Temba Bavuma was also just playing his first test match of that tour. And keeping all of this in mind, it felt like it would just be another regulation innings where India spinners would come in and clean up the South African batting lineup. And when the 4th inning started and the first wicket fell, that's exactly how it felt. Because at the end of the 4th over, South Africa were 5 for 1, having lost Dean Elgar. From one end, you had Ravichandran Ashwin exploiting the turn with the new ball, and from the other end, you had Ishant Sharma taking up the new ball duties. He's been making waves in the domestic circuit. So he's got a bunch of wickets. He did well in the Duleep Trophy. You would have seen him grab the headline for getting 4 wickets in 4 deliveries. Across 5 seasons, he's picked up 115 wickets at an average of 17.6.
As a fast bowler,
in India.
You can only pick wickets against the team that you play against. And so if it's weak or strong, that's not up to you.
They clearly want strong, tall, fast bowlers who can hit the deck, who can hit 140.
Yet he doesn't get a place in the India A squad.
Do you pick players on just one really good season? Because then they can be one season wonders.
I also feel like the 28-year-old fast bowlers are also in a knife edge. Like if you don't perform this season, then you're gone and never coming back. Why am I not getting picked?
But from here, instead of seeing a collapse which would have been routine, what we saw was a lot of defiance and grit from Temba Bavuma as well as Hashim Amla. The both of them had decided that irrespective of whether or not they get runs, they were going to put a hefty price on their wicket. And it showed also because they just kept leaving deliveries, and only if there was any delivery on the stump would they even bother putting their bat to the ball. Remember, this started at lunch on day 4. That's when South Africa came out to bat, and these two batted up until tea. They batted 39 overs, and in this time South Africa's score had just moved to 40 for 1. Eventually, with Ashwin's probing lines, he was able to get Temba Bavuma with an absolute peach of a delivery. Bavuma departed for 34 of 117 deliveries, but this was not even going to be the slowest knock in this test match. At the time of his departure, the score had 49 for 2 in 42.4 overs. Of course, the celebrations were muted because the Indians realized that there was still a job to be done. However, what they did not realize was that for them to get the next 2 wickets, it was going to take 77 overs in the boiling sun. And this is where the blockathon begins. Three of South Africa's batting pillars in the likes of Hashim Amla, Faf du Plessis and AB de Villiers put on an absolute display for the ages. Shortly after tea on day 4, it was Hashim Amla and AB de Villiers who were out there continuing this blockathon. What mattered to them was not how many runs they were going to get, but how often they were just able to keep the good deliveries out. And this is the point where the pitch was also starting to show that there's a lot more for the spinners. Ashwin was getting the ball to turn viciously from time to time, and even the pacers were probing away. It was also clear that South Africa had completely ruled out the possibility of trying to win this test match. At this point for them, it was just about how long they can survive for, and indeed, they showed intent in the fact that they wanted to just bat out till the end of the test match. Amla and de Villiers were of course rock solid in their defense, and they ended day 4 at 72 for 2 in 72 overs. At the end of day 4, not a lot of people would have thought that South Africa would even manage to play out these many overs, and especially at the loss of just 2 wickets. India of course were a disappointed bunch, but they still had a job to do. So did the South Africans, and something to take note of on day 5 was that within 8 overs time the new ball would be available. Next morning, India also did not waste any amount of time to take that second new ball, because just after one delivery at the 80.1st over, India decided that they wanted to use that second new ball. And it also paid dividends at least to begin with, because in the 85th over, they had Hashim Amla packing. It took a vicious turning and bouncing delivery from Ravindra Jadeja coming over the wicket to Hashim Amla to beat his bat and get him out bowled. South Africa had also been blocking a lot more aggressively, because while at some point they were going at least 1 run per over, when Hashim Amla was dismissed, they were 76 for 3 in the 85th over. Eventually, when Amla departed for 25 of 244 deliveries, it was the slowest knock for any batter in Test cricket history who'd scored 20 plus, at least since the time that balls have been tracked in Test cricket. Now from there, it was Faf du Plessis who came out to bat again with the same intent of just deciding to block the ball. It worked because South Africa were able to push to lunch without losing any other wickets. Even after lunch, de Villiers and du Plessis continued with the same resolve, because they continued to bat another 13 overs. It was finally in the 120th over of that innings when du Plessis fell for 10 of 97 deliveries. At this point, South Africa were 111 for 4. And quite similar to Amla, du Plessis' knock also was one of the slowest in the history of Test cricket. For any batter to have scored at least 10 runs, du Plessis' knock was the 4th slowest ever in the history of Test cricket. And realistically, if you're an Indian fan at this point, it was extremely frustrating, not just for the fans, but also for the players themselves. They had been out in the field for 120 overs. The only ray of hope was the fact that the batters to follow had not really done much in the series. And India, if they saw the back of AB de Villiers, would be able to gain control of this innings. And this theory also seemed to hold, because in just 12 deliveries that Dumini faced, he had to return without troubling the scorers. From 72 for 2 to 111 for 4, and eventually at 112 for 5, as an Indian fan, you would now start to believe that it is possible. And for South Africa, their blockade was slowly starting to end. But their wicketkeeper bat at the time, Dane Vilas, continued to show resistance along with AB de Villiers. While AB de Villiers did do a lot of the ball facing, Vilas was still out there for 50 deliveries and was able to score 13. He ensured that they were at least able to take South Africa to tea without losing another wicket. In fact, going into tea, South Africa were 136 for 5, and something you also need to keep in mind is that light was fading. And so one thing was for sure, that we were not going to get the entire 30 overs in the final session. The other thing also to keep in mind is that the bowlers were tiring out, the spinners had done a lot of work, and so the pacers would at some point have to come into the play. In fact, just to give you an idea of the number of overs that these bowlers had bowled, at that point, India had bowled 93 overs of spin, 46 overs for Ravichandran Ashwin and 47 overs for Ravindra Jadeja. Even the pacers had done their fair share of work, with Ishant Sharma having bowled 20 overs and Umesh Yadav as well having bowled 18 overs up until that point. And so with all of these things considered, and the fact that AB de Villiers was still out there with the wicketkeeper bat, meant that the South Africans would be slightly relaxed, but also would want to come out and give it their all in that final session and save the test match for their country. However, something that we've always heard of in test cricket, and something that a lot of commentators keep talking about, is how breaks tend to affect the flow of play, especially for a batter. While de Villiers had been able to do well to survive each break and come back and just focus harder and harder, this was not necessarily the case with the other South African batters. It was first Amla in the morning and du Plessis players later in the day who had both been dismissed after breaks. And this time, India would hope that AB de Villiers also fell to that exact same pattern. And while it would have been perfectly normal for India to start off with spin from both ends, Virat Kohli decided to start off with Umesh Yadav post T. Call it a coincidence or a stroke of brilliance, but in the fifth ball of that first over after T, Umesh Yadav got Dane Vilas not with a quicker delivery, not with a reverse swinging Yorker, but with an off cutter. And as luck would have it, the batter had not even completely missed the ball. In fact, he had chopped it onto his stumps. As unlucky as it gets. However, till AB de Villiers was out there, this match was not over. But for now, what was also important was that AB de Villiers might have had to rotate strike. He would have to ensure that he was able to farm the strike because now he was batting with the tailenders. However, Aswin did not even let an opportunity for this arise. Because the very first ball of his over post T, Ravichandran Ashwin gets AB de Villiers. It bounced, hit de Villiers' gloves and was eventually plopped up and caught at leg slip. But before we even move ahead, it is important to acknowledge the kind of innings that AB de Villiers was able to play. He scored 43 of 297 deliveries. In fact, for any batter in Test cricket who'd scored 40 plus, this was the slowest knock in the history of Test cricket. Where other batters struggled after breaks, AB de Villiers just kept powering through, and in fact, as the game progressed, as the innings got longer and longer, de Villiers' resolve just got a lot stronger. His concentration levels and his grit was incredible. However, unfortunately, it all came to an end in a slightly untimely manner. From here on out, it was always going to be a collapse, but it was Umesh Yadav who got 2 of the remaining 3 wickets and Ravichandran Ashwin cleaning up Morne Morkel. During the tea break, South Africa were just 5 down for 136 in 138 overs. From there, they lost their last 5 wickets for just 7 runs, getting skittled out for 143 in 143.1 overs. Thereby, South Africa becoming the only cricketing nation in the history of Test cricket to have an innings of greater than 100 but at a run rate of less than 1 run per over. It was unfortunate that for the kind of blockathon that we had witnessed and the kind of knock that we had witnessed from various batters, this did not go on to become a draw that South Africa could talk about. But there's still a lot of learnings from this, especially in the day and age today where the kind of Test cricket that's been played has been spoken about a lot. There's a lot of discussions around baseball. There's a lot of discussions around batters just not being good enough to play even 2 days of Test cricket. From there, if you look at the kind of innings that this was in a Test match, it puts into context how, despite different styles of play, what matters is the fiery spirit. In their own manner, despite South Africa not going hammer and tongs, they were able to show great resolve and almost eke out one of the greatest draws in the history of Test cricket. It was also rather symbolic in that it signified the end of a golden era for South African Test cricket and the start of a golden era for India's Test cricketing team. And so this has been our video. If you've liked this and even if you remember this Test match, definitely leave your comments down below. Share this with your friends, like the video and subscribe to the channel. We also have YouTube memberships now, so if you're not a member, we are going to have a lot of guests and also deep dives into a lot of cricketing topics. So definitely get our membership. All of our social links are in the description below. Give us a follow everywhere. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.